Theo Washington was 40 years old, and until that Saturday in June, he believed he was the luckiest man in Atlanta. He had built Washington Logistics Solutions from a single borrowed truck into a 23-vehicle freight operation, brick by brick, decision by decision, nobody handing him anything. He had Knox Brevard, his best friend since 7th grade, standing beside him at the altar. And he had Camille Foster, the woman who had looked at him across a charity gala 3 years ago, like she had been searching for him specifically. He believed that too. Then, before his bride took a single step down that aisle, an older woman pushed past the venue coordinator and walked calmly to the center of the room. Theo recognized her immediately. He had handed her $20 every single weekday morning for 3 years outside his office. Never asked her name, never asked for anything back. She had never asked him for anything either, until now. She looked directly at Theo, then at the man standing beside him, and said 7 words that stopped 200 people cold. What Theo found inside that envelope would reveal that the 2 people he trusted most in the world had been inside his finances, his files, and his future, and that everything he thought he was building toward had already been quietly claimed by someone else. He didn't shout. He didn't collapse. He straightened his jacket, walked to the microphone, and made a decision that would cost them both everything. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Every morning played out like clockwork. At 6:52 a.m., Theo Washington's F-150 rolled into the Murphy Avenue lot, its tires crunching against the gravel. The March air still held winter's bite, but spring was pushing through, painting the sky in soft pinks and blues. He pulled into his usual spot, grabbed his leather briefcase from the passenger seat, and began his daily walk to Washington Logistics Solutions' side entrance. The building wasn't much to look at. Red brick, 2 stories, with a sign that needed updating, but it was his. Every brick represented a decision he'd made right, starting with that first truck he'd bought at 24, using money his grandmother had saved in coffee cans. Dorothy Price sat in her usual spot by the bus shelter, her gray locks neatly pinned back, wrapped in a worn but clean jacket. Her cart stood beside her, everything she owned organized with military precision, clothes folded, papers sorted, life contained in plastic bins. She held her thermos with both hands, warming them against the morning chill. Theo reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. This wasn't charity. It was simply what his grandmother would have done. No phones recording, no social media posts, no audience to applaud. Just a man doing what felt right. "Thank you, baby," Dot said, accepting the money with quiet dignity. "You eat breakfast yet?" Theo asked, same as always. "I'm fine," she replied, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Theo nodded and continued to the side entrance, punching in the security code with familiar ease. Inside, the building was coming alive. The smell of coffee mixed with diesel fumes drifting in from the lot where his fleet of 23 trucks stood ready for the day's routes. Marcus, his head dispatcher, was already at the whiteboard, mapping out deliveries in different colored markers. "Morning, boss." Johnson's kid made the honor roll. "Tell him I said congratulations," Theo replied, meaning it. He knew all his drivers' children, their names, their birthdays, their dreams. That's how his grandmother had taught him to do business. Treat people like family, and they'll treat your business like home. In his office, the morning light caught a silver frame on his desk. The photograph showed 2 teenagers at a backyard cookout. Theo and Knox Brevard, arms thrown around each other's shoulders, caught mid-laugh at some long-forgotten joke. Knox, his best friend since 7th grade, the brother he chose. The man who'd co-signed his second truck loan when the bank looked at a young black man from southwest Atlanta and said no. Theo's mind drifted to Camille, and warmth spread through his chest. He remembered the charity gala where they'd met 3 years ago. She'd been running the event, moving through the crowd of donors with grace and purpose. She knew everyone's name, their spouses, their children, their pet causes. Then she'd turned and seen him across the room, and her face had lit up like she'd found something she'd been searching for all night. The memory shifted to 2 weeks ago. Camille at his kitchen table, surrounded by seating charts for their upcoming wedding. Her dark hair fell across her face as she studied the papers, rearranging names with careful consideration. Knox sprawled on the couch, watching game film on his tablet, offering occasional commentary about plays and players. Theo had moved between them, refilling coffee cups, feeling like the luckiest man in Atlanta. Everything he'd built, everything he loved, contained in one room. But there had been something. A moment so brief, he almost missed it. When he turned to walk back to the kitchen, Camille and Knox's eyes met. Just for half a second. Just a flicker. Nothing, really. Nothing at all. Now, at 1 a.m., Theo lay in bed staring at his bedroom ceiling. The city hummed outside his window, cars passing on distant streets, the occasional siren wailing. Sleep wouldn't come, though he had an early meeting tomorrow. His mind kept circling back to that look, that half-second, that nothing. Just pre-wedding nerves, he whispered to the darkness. That's all it is. The ceiling offered no response, and the night stretched on. The Ponce City venue glowed in the June afternoon light, 200 guests filling the rows in their Sunday best. Light streamed through tall windows, casting golden rectangles across the polished floor. The air smelled of roses and anticipation. Theo Washington stood at the altar in his custom navy suit, the one that had brought tears to Aunt Beverly's eyes when she first saw him in it. His hands were steady, clasped in front of him. Knox Brevard, his best man, stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder, just like they had since they were boys, trading lunches in the 7th grade cafeteria. The string quartet began to play, their violins weaving together in perfect harmony. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the room swung open, revealing the first glimpse of white. But before the bridal party could take a single step, there was movement near the entrance. The venue coordinator, clipboard in hand, reached out to stop someone, but the woman moved past her with calm determination. Theo's breath caught. He recognized her immediately. Dorothy Price. She wore clean, pressed clothes that didn't quite match the occasion. Her gray locks pinned back neatly, her spine straight as a ruler. She wasn't rushing or shouting. Each step down the aisle was measured, deliberate, like someone who had thought through this moment 1,000 times. A groomsman, Marcus's younger brother, stepped into her path halfway down the aisle. Dot stopped without resistance. She lifted her chin and spoke, her voice clear and strong enough to reach every corner of the suddenly silent room. Theo Washington, I have watched you give without asking for anything back for 3 years. You deserve the same. The air felt thick, charged with electricity. Theo couldn't move, couldn't speak. His grandmother had always said the truth arrives on its own schedule. Dot's eyes found his, held them for a moment, then shifted, just briefly, to Knox. The look held no anger, no judgment, just fact. The man standing next to you has been with your bride for over a year. I have seen them together. I have a photograph. It is in this envelope. She held up a white business envelope, the kind you'd use to mail a bill. Knox went rigid beside Theo, his shoulders tensing like he'd been struck. From the back of the room came a sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a word, from Camille. It was the kind of sound that writes itself into memory, that echoes in quiet moments years later. With the same careful precision that marked everything about her, Dot placed the envelope on the edge of the nearest pew, within easy reach. The venue staff approached, and she allowed them to guide her toward the exit. At the doorway, she paused. Without turning around, she added softly, "Good men deserve to know." Then she was gone, leaving behind a room full of held breath and racing hearts. Knox found his voice first. "Theo, man, she's disturbed. She doesn't know what she's talking about. You know that, right?" The murmurs started, spreading through the crowd like ripples in still water. Aunt Beverly was already half standing, her face a thundercloud. Someone near the back was asking if they should call security. Theo reached for the envelope. The paper was smooth under his fingers, unremarkable. He turned to Knox, his best friend, his brother in all but blood, the man who had stood beside him through every triumph and loss since they were 13 years old. Knox couldn't meet his eyes. That was all Theo needed to know. He straightened his jacket, the same precise movement he made before every important business meeting. His footsteps echoed in the growing chaos as he walked to the microphone stand the officiant had been using. When he spoke, his voice was so steady it sent chills through the room. "There won't be a wedding today. Thank you all for coming. Please enjoy the food. It's already paid for." Without another word, without looking at anyone, Theo walked out through the side door, alone. The envelope felt heavy in his hand as he crossed the parking lot to his F-150. He wouldn't go home. Home was full of Camille's books, her coffee mugs, her carefully chosen curtains. Every surface held her fingerprints. Instead, he turned the key and pointed the truck toward Murphy Avenue, toward his office, toward the one place that had always been purely his. The office was quiet, except for the hum of the industrial air conditioning. Theo sat at his desk, the envelope untouched before him, watching shadows stretch across the parking lot through his window. The same lot where he'd given Dot $20 every morning for 3 years. When Priya arrived, still in her pale blue bridesmaid dress, she didn't knock. She just walked in and sat in the chair across from his desk. Her makeup was slightly smudged. She must have cried at some point during the chaos, but her eyes were clear now. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Theo appreciated that about her. 6 years working together had taught her when to speak and when to let silence do its work. She wouldn't rush him. Finally, he opened the envelope. The first photograph slid out onto his desk. A drugstore print on regular paper. Knox and Camille sat at a corner table in what looked like one of those intimate Buckhead restaurants where you needed connections to get a reservation. Theo had never taken Camille there. The lighting was dim, romantic. Knox's hand covered hers across the white tablecloth. Their heads were tilted toward each other in a way that spoke of comfortable intimacy. The second photograph felt like a punch to the gut. Knox's black BMW parked outside Camille's midtown apartment building. Early morning light casting long shadows. The timestamp in the corner read 7:04 a.m. on a Sunday. The exact Sunday 3 weeks ago when Knox had texted that he was skipping their usual breakfast to sleep in. Theo remembered responding with a laughing emoji, telling his friend to get his rest. Behind the photos, 3 pages of careful cursive-filled lined paper. Dot's handwriting was precise, each letter clearly formed, the kind of penmanship that spoke of years of professional document preparation. "I was a legal secretary for 18 years, the letter began. "Good work. Stable life." Then came the cancer diagnosis. The medical bills piled up faster than the insurance payments. "While I was sick, my landlord took advantage. Fraudulent eviction. Kept my deposit. Ruined my rental history. One disaster fed into another, until there was nowhere left to fall but the street." Theo read on as Dot explained how she'd watched him every morning for 3 years. "I know faces," she wrote. 18 years watching lawyers taught me to read truth from lies. You have an honest face, Theo Washington. The kind that matches your actions." She described seeing Knox and Camille the first time by accident. The restaurant's windows were visible from a bus shelter she used on cold nights. "I told myself it might be innocent," she wrote. "But then I saw them again 2 weeks later. And again after that. I bought a disposable camera with change I'd saved. I'm not proud of taking pictures of strangers, but something in my gut said this truth needed proof. Near the bottom of the third page, Dot's writing grew more urgent. 10 days ago, they were at that restaurant again. The window was cracked for air. I heard her say his name, clear as day. Then she said, "After this, we won't have to worry about money." Theo read that line 3 times, each repetition burning it deeper into his memory. His hands were perfectly steady as he laid the pages down. "What do you need?" Priya's voice was soft but firm. I need to know what she meant by that. Theo reached for his phone. Not to call Knox. Not to call Camille. He scrolled to Jerome's number, his younger brother, the quiet one who knew how to find information without drawing attention. "Jerome, I need you to pull some threads." Quietly. He kept his voice even, professional. "I'll text you the details." After hanging up, he made one more call, to the number Dot had written at the bottom of her letter. A transitional housing facility in Mechanicsville. "Could you please tell Ms. Price that Theo Washington called?" he said, when the evening staff member answered. "I'd like to visit when she's ready." The sun had set by the time he finished. He sat alone in his office, still wearing his wedding suit, the city lights beginning to twinkle outside his window. The photographs lay on his desk like evidence at a crime scene. His mind was already working, mapping connections, seeing patterns the way he did, when planning logistics routes. The office was silent except for the distant sound of traffic on Murphy Avenue. In that silence, pieces were already starting to align. Monday morning arrived with the heavy weight of late summer heat. Jerome Washington stepped into Theo's office at 8 a.m. sharp, a manila folder tucked under his arm. His expression was grave, the kind of look doctors wear before delivering life-changing news. Theo sat behind his desk, his navy wedding suit hanging pristine on a coat rack in the corner. He'd been there since 6, reviewing manifests and route schedules like it was any other Monday, like his world hadn't imploded 48 hours ago. "You found something." It wasn't a question. Theo knew his younger brother's faces, all of them. This one meant the news would hurt. Jerome closed the door with a soft click and settled into the chair across from Theo. He placed the folder on the desk but didn't open it immediately. Instead, he looked at his brother with eyes that carried both compassion and anger. "Knox is broke," Jerome said flatly. "Not just regular broke. He's drowning." Theo leaned back slightly, waiting. Jerome had always been methodical. He would lay it out piece by piece. "That sports bar in Old Fourth Ward? The one you put 40,000 into as a silent partner 3 years ago?" Jerome opened the folder and spread out several documents. "It's hemorrhaging money. Has been for at least 18 months. Bank statements fanned across the desk like playing cards in a losing hand. Jerome pointed to highlighted numbers that told a story of mounting losses and desperate measures. "He took out 2 loans against the business," Jerome continued. "Never disclosed them to you, which violates your partnership agreement. He's 6 months behind on payments for one of them. The business is basically insolvent." Theo picked up one of the statements, studying numbers that should have been shown to him months ago. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "There's more." Jerome pulled out a printed email chain, placing it carefully on top of the bank statements. 8 months ago, Knox reached out to a business broker. "A contact of mine at the firm forwarded this to me." Theo read the email slowly. Knox's words were careful, professional, asking about procedures for buying out a silent partner's stake. Specifically, Knox wanted to know the process when the partner is emotionally invested and unlikely to agree voluntarily to a buyout. The office seemed to grow quieter, if that was possible. Outside, trucks were pulling in for morning dispatch, drivers calling greetings to each other, the normal rhythm of a business that Theo had built from one truck and a borrowed down payment. "He was planning this," Theo said softly. "Before the wedding. Before everything." "Yes." Jerome's voice was equally quiet. "But he needed leverage. He needed Camille." The name felt different in Theo's mouth now. Sharp-edged. Dangerous. Jerome nodded. She was the key. Once they were married, her name would be on your asset. She'd have legal standing as your spouse. They could force a business valuation, push through a buyout using her position. Use your own money to clear his debts. Theo stood slowly and walked to his window. 23 trucks sat in neat rows below, each one representing a careful decision, a calculated risk, a step forward. He'd built this piece by piece, truck by truck, route by route. Every vehicle below was a promise kept, to his drivers, to his customers, to himself. It wasn't just an affair, Theo said, still looking out at his fleet. It was an extraction, a 3-year con to get to my business. Yes, Jerome didn't soften the blow. He never had. Theo turned from the window. His face was composed, but something had shifted in his eyes, a coldness that hadn't been there before. "Call Marcus," he said, referring to their business attorney. "Set up a meeting, today, if possible." Jerome was already pulling out his phone. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time to show them what happens when you try to take something from someone who built everything from nothing." That afternoon, Theo and Jerome sat in Marcus Cohen's downtown office, laying out documents in the same careful order Jerome had used that morning. The attorney examined each piece of evidence, making notes in his precise handwriting. "The undisclosed loans alone are actionable," Marcus said, tapping his pen against the bank statements. "The breach of partnership agreement is clear. And this email to the broker?" He held up the printed chain. "This demonstrates premeditation. They weren't just having an affair. They were orchestrating a hostile takeover of your interests." Theo nodded once. "Start building the response. I want options on my desk by Wednesday." Marcus looked up from his notes, studying his longtime client's face. They really didn't know who they were dealing with, did they? Tuesday morning arrived with a wave of texts from Camille, each message carefully crafted, a perfect blend of contrition and wounded dignity. "Please, let me explain. You're not seeing the whole picture. We can work through this. What we have is real." Theo watched them appear on his screen, one after another, while reviewing the morning's dispatch sheets. He didn't respond. By 10 a.m., the texts stopped abruptly. The silence lasted exactly 93 minutes before a courier appeared at the Washington Logistics Solutions front desk with a cream-colored envelope. Inside was a 4-page letter, handwritten in Camille's precise script. Every word chosen to reframe the wedding disruption as a tragic misunderstanding. A series of coincidences twisted by a disturbed woman's imagination. The paper even carried a faint trace of her perfume, a detail so calculated it made Theo's jaw tighten. He placed the letter in his desk drawer without finishing it. At noon, his phone lit up with Aunt Beverly's name. "She just called me," Aunt Beverly said without preamble, "talking about how she needs someone who knows your heart to help you see reason." "What did you tell her?" "I listened to every word. Then I told her I'd pray for her soul and hung up." There was a pause. "You doing okay, baby?" "I'm standing," Theo said. "That's enough for now." Knox's silence spoke volumes. No calls, no texts. No showing up at the office like he had after every other crisis in Theo's life. The absence confirmed everything. A man with nothing to hide doesn't disappear. At 2 p.m., Theo pulled into the parking lot of the Mechanicsville Transitional Housing Facility. He carried coffee from the Good Place on Edgewood and a box of pastries from the French bakery near his office. The building was clean but worn, paint peeling at the corners, window units humming against the Georgia heat. Dot Price met him in the common room. She wore a pressed blouse and sat with perfect posture, her gray locks neatly pinned. The dignity in her bearing made the institutional furniture seem out of place. "I brought coffee," Theo said, setting the drinks and pastry box on the table between them. "Wasn't sure how you take it, so I got cream and sugar separate." "Black is fine," she said softly. "You didn't have to bring anything." "Wanted to." He settled into the chair across from her. "You almost didn't come to the wedding." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. 4 times I talked myself out of it. Sat right there on that milk crate and told myself it wasn't my place. What changed your mind? Dot was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee, though she hadn't added anything to it. I thought about who I used to be. Before the cancer. Before everything fell apart. 18 years at that law firm. My own apartment. My son proud to bring his friends over. She looked up at Theo. I thought about whether that woman could live with staying quiet. And she couldn't. Tell me about what happened, Theo said. If you want to. She did. The diagnosis came fast. The bills came faster. Insurance covered some, but not enough. The landlord saw weakness and pounced. Fabricated lease violations, manipulated paperwork, kicked her out while she was still doing chemo. By the time she got well enough to fight back, she was already on the street. The system moves quick when it's pushing you down, she said. Moves real slow when you're trying to get back up. Theo listened without rushing her, without offering empty comfort. When she finished, he said, I'm having an attorney call you. Not about my situation, about your housing case. The fraud that landlord pulled? That's actionable. I can't afford. You gave me something. Theo cut in gently. Let me give something back. That's just how it works. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded once. The nod carried the weight of someone accepting help while keeping their dignity intact. That evening, in his office, Theo called Priya to his desk. I need you to make a call, he said. To Sarah Mitchell. Priya raised an eyebrow. Sarah was part of Camille's social circle, someone who moved between their worlds. Let it slip that I'm struggling, Theo continued, that I might be open to talking. Make it sound natural. You want her confident, Priya said, understanding immediately. Confident people get careless. Priya made the call from her desk. Within 2 hours, Theo's phone buzzed with a text from Camille. I think we should talk. When you're ready, I'm here. Theo read the message once, then set his phone face down on his desk. Everything was moving exactly as he wanted. Wednesday morning arrived with a stillness that felt different from other dawns at Washington Logistics Solutions. The parking lot was empty except for 2 vehicles, Theo's F-150 and Priya's sensible Honda Civic. She had texted him at 5:30 a.m. Need to see you before everyone gets in. When Priya entered Theo's office, she carried a thick manila folder and wore the expression of someone who had not slept much. She closed the door behind her with a soft click that somehow felt final. I've been going through everything, she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. Not just the surface numbers. Every document, every access log, every communication with our vendors and partners for the last 3 years. Theo set down his coffee. What did you find? Priya opened the folder and removed a stack of papers, each one tagged with yellow post-it notes covered in her precise handwriting. 8 months ago, Camille contacted Martin and Associates directly. Our accountants? Former accountants now, Priya corrected. She identified herself as your fiancé and said she was helping with financial planning for the wedding and your shared future. She requested the last 3 years of Washington Logistics Solutions' complete tax returns. Theo's face remained perfectly still. And they gave them to her? James Martin himself authorized it. He never called to verify with you. Never sent a notification. Just handed over everything because she was your fiancé and it seemed reasonable. Priya's voice carried a controlled anger. Those returns show everything, Theo. Not just the basic numbers. The full revenue streams, asset valuations, equity positions, root profitability breakdowns, everything someone would need to calculate exactly what they could extract. She laid out the tax returns one by one. 3 years of carefully built success, mapped in columns and footnotes. Then she pulled out another document, this one marked with red tags. That's not all. 6 months ago, Knox contacted Martin and Associates too. He requested a formal business valuation, not just for his stake in the bar, for your $40,000 silent partner investment as well. He got the full report. Theo picked up the valuation document. Every page felt heavy with betrayal. They were building a case. Yes, Camille would have had legal standing as your spouse to force financial disclosures and challenge asset distributions. Knox already had standing as a business partner. Together they had mapped every dollar you've built and positioned themselves to force either a buyout of the bar stake or pressure you into a broader settlement. Priya's hands tightened on the folder. They were thorough. Theo read through each document methodically, his expression unchanging. The only tell was a slight tightening around his eyes as he reached the final page of the valuation report. "How long?" he asked finally. "How long what? How long have you known something was wrong?" With her, Priya was quiet for a moment. Since month 2 of the relationship, the questions she asked about the business were too specific, too targeted. "But," she spread her hands, "it was your life, and I had no proof." Theo nodded once. "I need you to pull every document either of them could have accessed through the business. Every email, every request, every authorization, everything. Already started. I'll have it complete by Friday." "Good." Theo stood and walked to his window, looking out at the empty lot where his trucks would start arriving soon. "I need you to be at my house on Saturday." "Your house?" "Yes. I texted them both last night, invited them to talk." Priya's eyes widened slightly. "Both of them? Separately? Told each of them to come alone? Knox at 2, Camille at 3. He turned back to face her. "Both confirmed they'll be there. And you want me there as what? A witness?" "Exactly." Theo sat back down and picked up the tax returns. "We're going to have a very specific conversation about documents and access and consequences. I want someone there who understands exactly what they took." His phone buzzed. A text from Camille confirming the time again, adding that she was so grateful for the chance to explain. 30 seconds later, a text from Knox. "I'll be there. We need to talk this through." Theo read both messages without responding. Saturday was coming, and he had preparation to do. Friday night settled over Atlanta like a heavy blanket. The city lights flickered through Theo's living room windows, casting soft shadows across the hardwood floors. Sleep wouldn't come. Hadn't really come properly since Saturday's revelation. He sat in his grandmother's armchair, a wide, sturdy piece the color of autumn leaves that had weathered decades of conversations and quiet moments. It was the only thing he'd kept when she passed, this chair that had witnessed so much of their family's story. Tonight, it held him as he thought about Knox, not Camille. Her betrayal was clean in its calculation, a straight line from target to execution. But Knox was different. 30 years of friendship laid out like photographs in his mind, each memory sharp enough to cut. 7th grade. 3 older boys from Westlake High had cornered Theo behind the gymnasium, demanding his new jacket, the one his grandmother had saved 3 months to buy. Knox, shorter than all of them, but refusing to show fear, stepped between Theo and those boys. "You'll have to go through me first," he'd said, voice steady despite the odds. They'd both gotten bruised that day, but they'd walked home together, the jacket still on Theo's back, laughing about how crazy it had been. The night Theo's mother died, Knox had been at a logistics conference in Savannah, 4 hours away. Theo hadn't called him, hadn't called anyone yet, still sitting with the hospital chaplain's words echoing in his head. But somehow Knox knew. He showed up at 2 a.m., still wearing his conference lanyard, and sat with Theo on the front porch until sunrise. He barely said anything, just stayed there, shoulder to shoulder, while Theo tried to understand a world without his mother in it. The early days of Washington Logistics Solutions, Knox co-signing that second truck loan when the bank looked at Theo's age and said no. The two of them in the pre-dawn hours, mapping routes on paper spread across Knox's bar counter before either of them had real offices. Every setback they weathered together, every small victory they celebrated. birthday cookouts at Knox's mother's house, the time they drove to Miami on a whim just because Knox said Theo needed to see the ocean at least once before he turned 25. Standing beside each other at Knox's father's funeral, neither of them speaking because there were no words big enough for that kind of loss, Theo let himself feel all of it. The weight of 3 decades of chosen brotherhood, the kind of friendship that becomes family through daily decision and constant presence. The grief was real, not just for what was lost, but for what had been real all along. Because it had been real. The love was real. The years were real. The moments of genuine connection and support were real. The betrayal didn't erase the love, and the love didn't forgive the betrayal. Both things were true at once, and that was perhaps the hardest part to carry. He didn't cry. He sat in his grandmother's chair and let each memory surface and settle, understanding that this, too, was part of who he was, this capacity to feel deeply without being destroyed by the feeling. At midnight, he went to his desk and took out a single sheet of paper, not to plan tomorrow's confrontation, but to write down what he knew to be true about himself. I built something from nothing. I was loyal without requirement. I was generous without needing recognition. I was not naive. I was trusting. And those are not the same thing. I am still all of these things. He folded the list carefully and walked to his closet, where tomorrow's suit hung pressed and ready. The same navy suit he'd worn to the wedding. He slipped the paper into the breast pocket, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that the day hadn't broken him. He was still himself, still standing. He laid out a fresh white shirt and his grandmother's favorite tie. Deep burgundy with a subtle pattern, she'd said, reminded her of autumn leaves. Set his alarm for 7. Everything was ready. Sliding into bed, Theo thought about how he'd given $20 every morning to a woman he didn't know, simply because it was right. That was still true. Everything else could be fixed. That was still true. Saturday afternoon sunlight streamed through Theo's living room windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. The house felt different today. Not just his home, but an arena carefully set for what needed to happen. Aunt Beverly sat in the corner, settled in his grandmother's autumn-colored armchair like a quiet sentinel. Priya stood near the hallway, her posture professional but protective. Through the back glass door, Jerome's silhouette was visible on the patio, a steady presence just outside. Theo adjusted the cuff of his navy suit, the same one from the wedding, worn now like armor. He'd positioned himself near the coffee table, documents arranged in precise order beneath his hands. The grandfather clock in the foyer struck 2. Knox's knock came exactly on time. When Theo opened the door, his former best friend stood there looking smaller somehow, like a man who'd spent days rehearsing speeches and still wasn't sure which version to use. His shirt was wrinkled at the collar, his eyes carrying the shadow of sleepless nights. Knox stepped into the living room, taking in the presence of others but focusing on Theo. "Bro, I need you to hear me out. I'm going to talk first." Theo's voice was calm, measured, the kind of steady that comes from absolute certainty. He began laying documents on the coffee table with the precision of a prosecutor building a case. First, the photographs from Dot's envelope, Knox and Camille at the Buckhead restaurant, Knox's car outside her apartment that Sunday morning. Next, the loan records showing the bar's insolvency, the business valuation Knox had secretly commissioned, the accountant's disclosure about releasing tax returns, each paper placed with deliberate care, building a monument to betrayal. "Theo, let me explain," Knox tried. "I'm not done." The email to the business broker came last, Knox's own words about forcing out an emotionally invested silent partner laid bare on the table. Theo had arranged everything in chronological order, showing not just individual actions, but the deliberate progression of choices that had led them here. You don't understand how it— Knox attempted again. I'm not done. When the final document was placed, Theo looked at Knox directly for the first time since he'd entered. The room held its breath. Even the afternoon light seemed to pause. I have one question, Theo said, his voice still perfectly controlled. Was any of it real? Or were you just waiting for the right moment this whole time? The question hit Knox like a physical blow. He seemed to collapse inward, not with anger, but with the total surrender of a man who has been completely found out. His shoulders dropped, his carefully rehearsed speeches crumbling. It started real, Knox said, his voice rough. Camille, she came to me first. I should have told you. But it got complicated. And then the money problems started and— Stop. Theo picked up another document from his desk. Your stake in the bar is being transferred back to me as repayment of the original $40,000 loan, which you apparently forgot was a loan and not a gift. The valuation your own appraiser conducted supports the number. You can sign the transfer now, or you can explain to a judge why you shouldn't. Knox stared at the transfer document, all color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked like he might speak again, but whatever words he'd prepared died in his throat. You can go now, Theo said. Knox stood slowly. He walked to the door without argument, without defense. The quiet click of the door closing behind him somehow carried more finality than any slam could have. 20 minutes ticked by on the grandfather clock. When Camille arrived, she stepped into the room like someone entering a chess match. Her eyes took in everything: the witnesses, the documents, the entire layout. And Theo watched her recalibrate in real time. It was all the confirmation he needed about who she truly was. I know about the tax returns, Theo said, before she could speak. I know about the valuation. I know about the accountant. And I know what you meant when you told Knox that after the wedding, you wouldn't have to worry about money. Camille went perfectly still, her practiced poise freezing in place. I'm not angry the way you expect, Theo continued. I'm angry because you wasted 3 years of my life that I will never get back. I'm angry because you looked at something I built and saw something to take. And I'm angry because you used my best friend to do it, which means you understood exactly how to hurt me, and chose that specific weapon on purpose. He slid a formal document across the table. His attorney's demand regarding unauthorized access to proprietary business documents, with the Georgia Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division clearly noted at the top. The hospital board has also received a letter, he added, noting that a senior administrator used her position and title to obtain confidential business records under false pretenses. Camille stared at the document, her fingers twitching slightly at the edges. You're really going to do this? I already did it. She stood and left without another word, her heels clicking a sharp retreat on the hardwood. From the corner, Aunt Beverly's voice carried the weight of generations. Baby, your grandmother would be proud of you. Theo sat down for the first time in hours, releasing a breath that felt like it had been held for 3 years. The following weeks unfolded like dominoes falling in precise order. Knox's attorney, a man who had handled his bar's licensing paperwork for years, reviewed the loan documentation with increasingly grim expressions. After 3 days of searching for loopholes, he delivered the verdict Knox had feared. There was no viable defense against the transfer demand. The original loan agreement is clear, the attorney explained, tapping the yellowed document. Mr. Washington's $40,000 was structured as a business loan with equity conversion terms, not a direct investment. Your signature is on every page. Knox signed the transfer paperwork in Theo's attorney's office on a Tuesday morning, 13 days after the confrontation. He kept his eyes down, his pen scratching against paper with a finality that echoed. Theo wasn't present. He didn't need to be. The old Fourth Ward sports bar, Knox's pride for 5 years, limped along through summer and into early fall. Without the marriage scheme's promised windfall to clear his debts, the numbers simply didn't work. One Tuesday in October, Knox taped a closed-for-renovation sign to the door. By Friday, his remaining staff knew it wouldn't reopen. Jerome's commercial real estate contacts kept him informed. Knox sold his condo, quietly packed whatever fit in his SUV, and drove to Charlotte. He took a sales position with a beverage distributor, his first time working for someone else since college. When Jerome told Theo this detail over lunch, Theo just nodded. There was no satisfaction in the news, no spike of vindication. Instead, he felt something settle inside him, like a door closing softly in a quiet house. Camille's professional unraveling moved faster, the damage spreading through Atlanta's healthcare circles like ink in water. 3 weeks after Jerome's anonymous letter reached the hospital board, they convened a formal review. Camille hired Caroline Masters, a reputation management attorney known for handling delicate situations. But even Masters couldn't spin unauthorized access to business documents into innocent wedding planning. Not with the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division already asking questions. The board has concerns about judgment and integrity, the hospital's chief counsel said during the final hearing. The unauthorized use of position and title to obtain confidential business records shows a pattern of behavior incompatible with senior administration. They voted to terminate her employment on a Wednesday afternoon. Human Resources walked her out through the main lobby, her personal items packed in bankers' boxes by security. Her hospital badge, the one she'd used to access restricted floors for 3 years, was collected at the door. Former colleagues watched through office windows, phones already buzzing with messages. Atlanta's healthcare administration community was tight-knit. Word traveled fast. Details emerged in pieces. The wedding that wasn't, the financial documents, the board's findings. Each new element added weight to her name. After 2 months of unsuccessful local interviews, she accepted a position in Birmingham. Assistant administrator, 3 steps down from her previous title, at 60% of her former salary. The termination followed her like a shadow. Background checks flagged it. Reference calls stumbled over it. Every interview included some version of, "Can you explain the circumstances of your departure from Atlanta General?" Theo took the $40,000 recovered from the bar transfer and turned it into something new. He used it as down payment on a 2022 Freightliner for Antoine Carter, a 26-year-old driver from Vine City. Antoine had started as a warehouse loader 2 years earlier, worked his way up to short routes, stayed late to learn dispatching, asked smart questions about logistics planning. He reminded Theo of himself at that age, hungry to build something, willing to learn every piece of the business from the ground up. Dot Price's story found its own kind of justice. The attorney Theo retained, a housing rights specialist named Marcus Chen, built a solid case against her former landlord. The civil judgment wasn't massive, but it was enough. Combined with her Social Security and the part-time bookkeeping position Jerome helped her secure at a local construction company, she had what she needed to start over. She chose a small apartment in Mechanicsville, 4 blocks from the bus shelter where she'd spent 3 years. The location wasn't random. She wanted to walk past that shelter every morning, not as a reminder of what she'd lost, but of what she'd reclaimed. The thing about systems, she told Theo when he stopped by with a housewarming plant, is they only work if someone makes them work right. You didn't rescue me. You just made the rules apply the way they were supposed to. She set the plant, a peace lily, on her small kitchen windowsill. Her bookkeeping ledgers were arranged neatly on a desk by the window, her legal secretary experience finding purpose again after 18 years. 14 months stretched like a lifetime since that Saturday in June. Theo sat at his desk, now in the corner office with windows on 2 sides, reviewing the final paperwork for Washington Logistics Solutions' newest contract. 3 years, $12 million, exclusive freight services for the City of Atlanta's Public Works Department, the largest deal in the company's history. Priya knocked once and entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She'd grown into her new role as COO with the same quiet competence she brought to everything. The equity agreement they'd signed last month meant she now owned 15% of what they were building together. "The new drivers start orientation tomorrow," she said, setting his coffee down. All 4 passed their final certifications. Theo nodded, looking past her to the dispatch floor through his office windows. 27 trucks now. Each one a decision made right. A calculated risk that paid off. The Murphy Avenue building belonged to them now. He'd closed on the purchase 3 weeks ago, ending 15 years of monthly rent checks. His grandmother's autumn-colored armchair sat in the corner of his office, its familiar presence grounding him. Some days he caught himself reaching for his phone to text Knox about a win or call Camille to share good news. The impulse was muscle memory, nothing more. Like a phantom limb that still itched sometimes. He hadn't dated since June. People asked, friends, family, even Aunt Beverly in her gentle way. But he was present in his life now, in a way he hadn't been when Camille occupied so much space in it. He saw things clearly, felt things fully. The business thrived under his undivided attention. Tuesday evenings belonged to the Vine City Junior Business Cohort, 8 young people with dreams bigger than their current circumstances. They met in a community center classroom, surrounded by whiteboards covered in business plans and cash flow projections. Theo recognized himself in their hunger to build something lasting. "Mr. Washington," Marcus had asked last night, "how do you know who to trust in business?" Theo had taken his time answering. "Trust isn't the problem," he'd said finally. "Being afraid to trust, that's the problem. You trust carefully. You verify consistently. But you don't stop trusting, because the minute you do that, you stop growing." The spring morning air was crisp as Theo walked the familiar half-block from his parking lot to the office entrance. Cherry blossoms dusted the sidewalk pink. He'd made this walk thousands of times, could measure his life in these steps. The bus shelter stood empty, as it had for over a year. Dot's apartment was visible from here, 4 blocks down, her peace lily still thriving in the kitchen window. She'd been promoted to full-time at the construction company, her old legal secretary skills serving her well in their contracts department. Theo stopped at the shelter, same as always. The $20 bill felt familiar between his fingers as he pulled it from his jacket pocket. For a moment he held it, remembering mornings of small kindnesses that added up to something larger than their parts. Then he folded it precisely and walked the extra block to slide it into the donation box at the Mechanicsville Transitional Housing Facility. 6 months of 20s. Every weekday morning. No social media post. No performance. Just the quiet continuation of something that mattered. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. "You give because of who you are, baby. Not because of what you'll get." She'd lived that truth every day of her life. He was finally understanding its full depth. Inside the office, the morning rhythm was familiar as heartbeat. Dispatchers arrived with coffee and keyboards clicking. Drivers checked in, their voices carrying across the floor. Antoine waved from the break room, his keys to truck number 24 jingling. The big whiteboard filled with routes and manifests, the day's logistics taking shape in dry erase markers. Coffee and diesel scented the air, the smell of work being done, of pieces moving in precise coordination. Theo paused in the doorway of his office, taking it in. 1 truck. He'd started with 1 truck and a loan from his grandmother. Now, 27 trucks carried the Washington Logistics Solutions logo across the southeast. He was still building. Some people took what they could see. He had always known to invest in what they couldn't. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.